Mercy Muroki is a columnist, a senior researcher at the Center for Social Justice. Welcome to Spectator TV. Let me just go through some of the things that I think the report says, and you can mark my card. One of the conclusions would seem to be that when we look at disparities in performance between various ethnic groups, that family structure and social class often have a bigger impact than race. Is that correct?
Yes, you see this. Thank you for having me on before I begin. You see this in a lot of the areas we looked at. We looked at education, crime and policing, health, and employment and enterprise. And just to take education as an example, we commissioned a bespoke study from the University of Oxford, and actually it clearly showed that socio-economic differences are the key drivers of sort of academic performance across different ethnic groups. But even then, it's completely complicated as well, because what you see is ethnic minority children actually at the same social class even go on to outperform their white counterparts in many instances. And often the disparities in family structures between the different ethnic groups are absolutely staggering. But if you look at the group that has the highest level of lone parenthood, this is Caribbean kids. We're talking 6 in 10 Caribbean kids growing up in lone parent households. And we know that working class households are also more likely to be lone parent households than middle class households. So you can very much begin to map the ethnic differences in outcomes with these other factors such as socioeconomics and family structures.
Well, Mercy, that brings me to the next question I wanted to ask, because I think the report gives the data that shows that among all the ethnic groups that make up Britain, and there are many of them, sometimes you kind of lump them as if they're an undifferentiated mass, but actually there's incredible diversity among all the ethnic groups, and that the only ethnic group, every ethnic group performs better than whites, bar Black Caribbean pupils. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Andrew. And as I say, this is why we simply can't make this a BAME versus white issue. And actually, beyond that, you get people saying, black exclusions, for instance, black outcomes. You can't even do that, because actually what we see is African children outperform, white kids outperform, the kind of average. And Black Caribbean kids are one of the worst performing. So even once you start saying, well, there must be racism towards black kids because exclusions, African kids are no more likely to be excluded from school than their white British counterparts. Again, it's the Black Caribbean kids that see these high levels of exclusions. And then you have to ask yourself, hang on a second, is this institutional racism blanket explanation adequate, or is there other things going on that mean even if you're black, your outcomes are likely to be different depending on whether you're an African immigrant or, a third generation Black Caribbean child?
And I was reading that the pay gap between ethnic groups, the average among ethnic groups and the average in the white population, the pay gap is down now to 2.3%. And something that I thought gave great hope for the future was that your report says it's now negligible for people under 30.
Yes, that's right. So the ethnic pay gap, and this is between white British majority and ethnic minorities, is down to 2.3%, which is the lowest level, in a decade. So again, you see that, upwards trajectory. I know there are a lot of people in the race lobby who don't want to accept at all that there might have been any progress over the last, couple of decades. But, the data is very clear on this. And as you say, the under 30s don't see any, statistically significant wage gaps between them. So again, there's this idea that we haven't progressed, or that we're kind of cherry picking data to show where there might be bits of progress and hiding the other data. It's not true, because this is, official statistics. These are national statistics. And, if they want to argue with that, they shouldn't be arguing with us, quite frankly. They should be arguing with the statisticians who produce these robust data sets.
Now, the report does not say there's no racism in Britain. That would be absurd. We still see many individual examples of it, of racist attitudes and so on. That cannot be just hidden away. You see it particularly in social media. But your report also says that some communities in our country are still haunted by historic racism. What did you mean by that?
Well, this is kind of speaking to the fact we know for a fact that people feel that there is significant racism in this country. I can point to the official crime survey for England and Wales, which shows actually racially motivated crimes have gone down massively over time. But it's the case that it doesn't change that people very much feel that not reflective of their reality. And what that's speaking to is a kind of a legacy, because of course Britain was severely racist a long time ago, and there was considerable racism only 4 or 5 decades ago. And these are people there's many people living in the country today who would have been experiencing racism on a daily basis. And so yes, there is a lot of people in the country will be living with that legacy of feeling that Britain's not for them. That they perhaps won't have experienced the kind of prosperity that many of the younger generations have experienced. So there is definitely a legacy, but we've had kind of people coming out today, particularly on the left, and kind of, these woke activists, and saying the report has denied racism. That's not the case at all. We have said, in fact, if they look on just the first recommendation, the first recommendation is to tackle racist language and to tackle kind of racism and to empower the equalities watchdog to do that. And on page 36, we actually set out a kind of framework so that we can properly kind of disentangle the different manifestations of racism, instead of just kind of applying a blanket accusation of racism on everything.
Well, anybody who thinks we haven't come a long way didn't live in our country in the 50s or 60s. I remember a by-election campaign in a Labour seat in which I think it was the Tory candidate, though I should be careful, their election slogan was, if you want N-word for a neighbour, then vote Labour. Yeah. So I think we're not there yet, but we've come a long way from attitudes like that. And when I look at your report, it seems things are more complicated and more sophisticated, more nuanced. Race is obviously a factor in some things, but family influence, I think your report says, social class, culture, religion, and so on are all just as important, and sometimes maybe more important than race. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And fundamentally what we're saying is disparity is not always discrimination. In the same way that everybody knows or should know that correlation is not causation. So our approach was to a kind of inductive approach. We start with the data, and then we kind of let the data lead us. And what the data showed is that there are all these other factors, and also that there are disparities that really can't really be explained by kind of this white on BAME, to use that dreaded term, racism. One of the most shocking things for me in the report was that young black people between age 16 to 24 are 24 times more likely to be victims of homicide than their white counterparts. That is, for me, on a scandalous level. To say, okay, well, that must be proof of racism. Well, actually, that you're basically kind of ignoring all the other variables that might be driving that. Clearly, there's issues of deprivation. There's issues of perhaps even absent fathers, which I'm sure people don't like to go down that route. There's all these issues that we really could be talking about to tackle what is, a shocking statistic, which is that, 24 times more likely to be killed. So these are the sorts of conversations we should be having, and instead we get led down this path of, a tit for tat, conversation about, oh, is it institutional racism? Does it exist? Does it not? And then you get ridiculous things as well. I saw Clive Lewis, the Labour MP, his response to the report was to tweet an image of a KKK person. So, that kind of level of debate is just, I mean, I would say it's laughable, but it's not even funny at all. I just don't think the people who are criticising this report have actually come out with anything to tell us why exactly, what data they disagree with, what recommendations they disagree with, and why. So it's, again, we're getting into a lot of tit for tat identity politics stuff instead of dealing with the real issues.
But a final question to you. You must have known you were going to stir up a hornet's nest here. I mean, the current fashion on both sides of the Atlantic, and perhaps even a growing fashion in anti-racism, is to see all ethnic disadvantage through the prism of white supremacy. And you're challenging that head on. So it's quite a threat to those who traditionally have seen themselves as the people who spoke up for racial disadvantage.
Yes, that's right. And I think that is the battle on our hands. And, all these things one of I can never pronounce her surname, but Dr. Scholler, who's always kind of brought out by mainstream channels to provide commentary on race, her response to the report was to call Dr. Tony Sewell a token black man who was spreading white supremacist lies. Now, Tony Sewell has dedicated his life to supporting ethnic minority people fulfill their full potential. He runs a charity that helps young black and ethnic minority kids go into STEM careers. To suggest he's spreading white supremacist lies, I mean, that just shows the level of detachment from reality. And actually, these people try to intimidate you into being silent about the data, being silent about all these disparities. And, to coin a phrase, I won't be silent and I won't be silenced, Andrew.
Well, they've had it their own way for so long, Mercy, that you've now threatened them with this report. So I'm not surprised that they're going to be kicking back, because their very purpose of existing is undermined by what your report says. Mercy, thank you for joining us on Spectator TV. I hope you'll come back as this issue develops. It's not going to go away.